Hey there! Welcome to another episode of Raw Green, a show produced by Obi, a sustainability consultancy specialized in life cycle assessment, research, and green techs. Learn more about us on oneobi.com or take a look at our pages on various social medias. Links are ready for you in the description. Ciiiao! I am Francesco De Lieto. I am passionate about sustainability and green technologies. Welcome back to a new episode of Raw Green. Today we are exploring the crucial role of coral reefs. Though they cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, they support 25% of all marine life, protect coastlines from storms, and sustain over 500 million people through fisheries, tourism, and coastal protection. Unfortunately, coral reefs are disappearing at an alarming rate. Between 2009 and 2018, we lost 14% of global corals due to rising sea temperatures, with scientists warning that if warming continues, up to 90% could vanish. And this decline threatens biodiversity, food security, and entire economies. To understand what's at stake and how we can take action, we're joined by Krista Ciiiao, the director of Mother of Corals, a non-profit dedicated to coral conservation. Krista, thank you for being here and welcome to Raw Green. How are you today?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. And let's start immediately talking about the job that Mother of Corals does. So you guys are focused on reef restoration. Can you walk us through your approach? So, for example, how do you decide where to reconstruct reefs and what are the key steps from start to finish?
Yes. We focus on coral reef restoration education. So when we're looking for places to do what we do, because we use artificial reef structures, the places where those are actually most handy are in places where the reef has completely collapsed. So if you're a snorkeler or even somebody that has watched Nat Geo, you may notice that fish are only in areas that fish and other marine life are only in areas where there is some sort of structure there. And that structure is typically because of hard corals in a coral reef. So in places where the corals have died and the structures collapsed, then in order to start bringing that ecosystem back more quickly, we use artificial structures so that that piece is already there. The fish come back, other marine life starts coming back, and then we are planting the corals on top. So when we have our course, people come and learn first of all the basics of coral reefs, difference between hard corals and soft corals and sponges. So it talks about marine life and the importance of apex predators and sharks and things. Day two, we actually go and build the artificial structures with the person on my team who does that. And then day three, we're putting the structures in the water and mimicking reef morphology. Day four, we do actually some kind of coral restoration, if that's propagation, if it's outplanting, it kind of depends on where the site is in its evolution. And then day five is monitoring so that we have metrics of everything that we're doing and accomplishing, and also that we can kind of foresee the future a little bit. Well, when we see that ocean temperatures rising, we know we might have bleaching coming and things like that.
You just briefly mentioned, I think, a technique in restoring coral reefs. Can you give me an idea or can you list some technologies and what is especially the one used by Mother of Corals?
Yeah, there are several different methods of coral restoration. So corals can reproduce both sexually and asexually. And if you're going to do restoration and sort of play with sexual reproduction of corals, you typically have like an on-land tank and a science lab and things like that. We don't have that. We focus on asexual reproduction, which means a coral polyp can clone itself, and then those can clone themselves and clone themselves. And a colony that has all the same DNA um, becomes that way because of the cloning process. And so with the coral propagation, when you take corals like branching corals are typically what a lot of restoration orgs focus on because they respond so well to this. But when you take a piece of coral that is a colony and you cut it into smaller pieces and you hang it in the water column away from predation, they actually go into growth mode. It's kind of like gardening, right? So they start growing faster. They want to make up for whatever made them smaller. And so at that point, they're growing up to four times faster than they would
Wow.
naturally. And then you can tell as they're hanging in that water column, when they start to get bigger and bigger, that's growth starts to slow. And we see that because we're measuring every few weeks, we're measuring the size of the corals. And then when they kind of slow more or less to a halt, that it's time to propagate again. And that's how you can I've started a nursery last year with 8 pieces of coral. I now have 200.
Mm. Is there a case where too much coral can create too much damage? Let me use an analogy here with algae. Algae are a wonder of natures. There are over 10,000 different varieties of algae. They are a carbon sink, and they at the same time, when you have algae bloom, they are a killer of life. So does the same thing can happen with corals as well?
The corals can regulate themselves a little bit better than that. I mean, I don't know that that is necessarily an issue anywhere anyway with where we are right now with climate change, but you can see different coral species, if they're covering the same rock, you can see them start to sort of battle with each other, and one
Mm,
may win or lose, but it's not necessarily that there would be too much in an area. It would just support more life and more healthy ecosystems.
okay. Well, some projects are breeding, I read, heat resistant corals.
Mm.
They're projecting a X, Y, Z level of temperatures in the oceans, and they are already breeding this variety of coral that is able to withstand that kind of conditions. Uh, do they work? Is it something that Mother of Corals it is evaluating, and how promising are they for, let's say, large scale conservation projects?
Right, yeah. So what people are doing right now, again, that would be more in a tank when you're trying to play with DNA a little bit, and also a little bit with the symbionts. So that's the algae that lives inside the coral, playing with those and having those be heat resistant, so that when the water temperature rises, they're not being expelled from the coral, which is what causes bleaching. What we do is like a little bit of a, I'll say like a poor man's version, right? So I am definitely going and I'm collecting different DNA of the same species from different areas of the archipelago where we are that have survived the bleachings of last year. I guess now it's 2 years ago, 2023. I mean, we have temperature spikes here twice a year, but it was pretty devastating in 2023. So the species, um, the branching species that we're working with, we collected the ones that survived that. We have, one that was in a construction runoff zone and one that was kind of in a high pollution area. And we take those and put them in a nursery together so that when they reach sexual maturity, in theory, they will sexually reproduce together and create a stronger coral, or at least have the chance to.
So that this was one of the questions that I meant to ask you, and it is mostly related to the success rate among all your projects. What has been your success rate so far, and what have you learned in making coral restoration projects more effective?
So I'll speak separately about because we measure fish count as well, which, in an area where
Okay.
there is no structure and then we put the artificial structures there, we're measuring the change of that over time. And so the average for my projects over 1 year increase in fish count is 317%. Uh, so for corals,
Wow.
it's I don't know that I really, yeah, it's good. That's a good number. I had
Yeah.
one project that was 400, but yeah, it's fun to watch that change, right? It's fun to be counting that and seeing that. With corals, it's a little trickier. So I was with a project before I started with Mother of Corals, and we had propagated a lot. We had several different nurseries, and I know when that 2023 bleaching happened here, that they lost 90% of their corals. Because my project's newer, and I don't have enough data to really call it, factual. Um, I don't publish numbers that say this, but at this point in our very new nurseries, we are at 100% survival. I don't expect that to stay the same. I mean, that is a normal thing to have some loss, right? To have some disease or some loss. But I haven't published numbers yet because you really should have about 3 years of data before you put that line in the sand.
Let's move for a second from outside of the water. Okay, coral reefs are important for marine life, upon which lots of coastal communities rely on. And have you worked with communities that, for example, lost fisheries due to reef degradation? Can you share a case where, for example, a restoration project brought a positive change?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I have several examples. There's a good one. I did a project. It's actually still in progress, has not completed, but on the Pacific side of Panama, where we were asked to come in and evaluate why the 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 fish count had gone down so significantly. So this was a fishing village, an indigenous fishing village in Panama, rely completely on the fish for their nutrition, for their uh, food, but also for their livelihood, so they sell it as well. And when we got there and kind of snorkeled around, and we noticed that a lot of the reefs had been completely wiped out by the people using weighted fishing nets, and they just, there had just never been a correlation taught to them about corals and fish. So in the beginning, when you start using a weighted fishing net, it's like, wow, look at all these fish we can get. Let's
Mm.
keep doing this. But then over time, when the corals go away, the fish go away. And so that was a really big, I mean, I think the biggest, yes, we were able to start restoration with them, but the biggest part of that is education, which, as I mentioned, that's kind of the focus of our org. So to be able to teach people, you know, not only why what happened, but also how to fix it and keep it in a way that's sustainable for the fish that they need, was a good win.
They also, I mean, they work not just for the fishing industry, but also for the tourism, whether it is for snorkeling or because of just conservancy projects. So it's a major economic drive. Reefs are a major economic driver. Have you seen cases where communities suffered from reef loss? Are there examples, for example, where restore reefs helped revive local economies?
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, I want to point out that how much of that really goes to education.
Yeah.
Just having we had Bocas is a Mission Blue Hope spot, and we had a training course that we did in 2023 for the local any boat captain in the area, mostly that did tours, but some that were also, fishermen as their livelihood, and taught them about marine ecology and how all the pieces fit together. And, I think it's still too soon to quantify the results from that, but knowing what we see and the difference in a lot of these boat captains and the way that they, you know, and the way they manage their tours, because we taught them about, sustainable tourists want to come and see this kind of behavior,
Yeah.
and will pay more for that kind of behavior, right? But seeing that change, just in the last year has been phenomenal.
Well, the question I would have, I'm pretty sure you heard about sanctuaries. I remember in Thailand, for example, that they have been completely devastated by local tourism, and the government decided to lock them in for a 10 years duration, said no more tourists allowed there, no more boats allowed there. There weren't particular intervention there, but just nature resilience helped the
Mm,
recovery, like a magnificent recovery of the local habitats, reefs, and marine flora and fauna that 10 years initially projected, where results were achieved in a little bit more than 5 years with all their indicators. Now, unfortunately, I don't remember exactly the indicators that they were using to check the full recovery of those areas, but it was fascinating. It's just 5 years or a little bit more. Nature itself recovered. You just leave it do it by its job, and it recovered
right,
by itself. And
right.
now they restarted tourism operation, but with an approach more tailored toward nature. Say no more 150 boats a day that goes there. There is a
Right.
limited number of boats with silent propulsion systems. It's just phenomenal what can be done. You put the two things together,
Yeah.
you can. There are obviously economies created around nature itself, and if done in a sustainable
Right.
way, it's a win-win for both man and nature. So it's an amazing thing.
I'm sure that was a tough decision to make by whatever politician made the decision, because it's not going to be popular with the people who live off of tourism, right?
No,
So, and this is what we run to in the world. Like, money drives our world. And so if you say, hey, we're going to take a break because what you need to show tourists is suffering, a lot of times people don't see the bigger picture, right? And then
yeah,
the right, supporters of the politician could come in and say, "Hey, we're going to get you out of office." I mean, this is what happens all over the place. So I'm actually quite impressed that that decision was made and followed through on, and also now is a case study, right, for other
yeah.
places who might want to do something like that. I'm happy about that.
Well, hardest choices requires the strongest will, and the obviously a decision like that, the impacts on local economies that lives off tourism, it is an
Hmm.
extremely painful one. That is without any doubt. It is to
Right.
support in the best way possible those local economies, and the job that you do, educate them on, let's say, that
Hmm.
investment that it is being done at T0, and what are going to be the returns at T5 or T10. So it is very important. Bali did the same thing. Bali still has an incredible problem with plastics all around their
Hmm.
beaches, and they arrived at a point where their sewage system was it 4 or 5 years ago, was dumping everything into the water. I mean, we're talking Bali, one of the most famous places on earth. And they had to shut it down for a little bit with incredible damages for the local economies. But who
Hmm.
wants a tourist to come and find himself or herself in the middle of a Suez discharge? I mean, nobody but nobody. So, and the damages in terms of
Right.
image as well would have been much
Yeah.
worse. So again, it is just to put things into perspective. So let me ask you one more thing. Global warming, it is one of the biggest threats to reefs, obviously. While restoration definitely helps, can it keep with the large losses of corals around the world? So, for example, how can you balance your job at Mother of Corals with the biggest climate challenge? In short, how
Right.
long can you cope with this? Because the situation is not getting any
Right.
better.
Well, and actually I'm glad you brought that up because it's really what spawned me starting Mother of Corals as targeting education because I think that the short answer is no. Like a small restoration project in the Caribbean, you know, raising, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 corals, is that gonna withstand climate change and also, you know, turn over the problems with corals? No, probably not. But if you're focusing on bringing in non-scientists, tourists, and the local community to learn about how they live their lives is impacting climate change, which is impacting the reefs, then maybe, you can cut it. It's more about, restoration is very important, but education and conservation have to be part of it as well.
The education part, I think it's prevention. Let's call it this way. It's prevention. So I'm reading this book, which it is a book that I heard so much about in the past few years, and it's called The Ministry for the Future. I don't know if you heard of it, but Kim Stanley Robinson. It is a book that I keep hearing from various experts in climate tech and global warming and blah, blah, blah. And it is basically a novel about living in a world where all the effects of climate change that we're talking about it now, they're actually happening. But it contextualizes them into the everyday life. So living with the temperature outside at 45 degrees and 10% humidity, and living in a world where the ocean's sea level have risen 10 meters. Okay, so the disappearance of coastal communities and whatnot. And those are all things that I work on about it every single day. I think on about it every single day, but I never thought about the idea of living into that situations. And the author has done, now I understand the hype behind this book. The author has done an incredible job in describing the pains of living into that everyday life, climate, eco-terrorism. So there's so many things that
Yeah,
literally right now we talk about it, but we never contextualize them in a future that is not too distant, that is not too far
right.
away.
I think people have a hard time, in general, people have a hard time theorizing, right? It's what am I doing today? We were told all the time, live in the moment, and that's actually a great practice. But um, living in the moment should be also thinking about what am I doing today that's impacting the future.
Exactly.
And so I need to read that book. I need to read that book, and I
You need
practice
to read the
that
book,
too.
and I haven't finished it yet. I read about half of it, and it is staggering. It starts with
Mm,
this heat wave getting into India that kills like 20 million people. And it
mm,
describes in such an incredible way what it means to live at that higher temperature where you cannot even cool yourself down into a small lake because the temperature of the water
mm.
it is higher than your body temperature, so you wouldn't find any
Wow.
let's say refreshment, sorry,
Hmm.
for your body. And it talks about
Right.
access to energy, so grids collapsing, so people needs to rely on generators, and there are no generators available, there is no gas, so people start to pillaging to be able to have these generators running, start to steal generators to be able to run air conditioning. Again, it's mind-blowing, it's amazing
Right.
description. And you're there reading, holy really, yeah, that makes sense. So talking
Hmm.
about
Right.
your education job, what besides climate change, reefs suffer also from. You mentioned it this earlier. Suffer from overfishing. So the guys go there with the nets and say, "Oh, fantastic! This is all the catch. Let's keep going doing this."
Hmm.
But they also suffer from pollution and coastal development as well. So, in your work, which one of these, or if there are any others, please say it, are the most urgent threats, and besides education, how they can be addressed?
How do you choose? I probably will say overfishing, and it was cute. I went into the local elementary school a few months ago to talk to the kids, and when I brought up overfishing, there was one kid that was like, "So how many fish can I catch with my dad before it's overfishing?" I'm like, "No, that's not really overfishing. You're fine." And he kept asking me
But good
questions
question,
about
though.
fishing with his dad. Yeah, it was
Smart
cute.
kid.
He
Yeah.
also went home and yeah, he also went home and checked all of his sunscreen to make sure it was reef safe. So he's on the right track. But overfishing in the sense of big fishing vessels, right? And also, I feel like this has been coming up at least in my feed in my life more and more recently is just the the overfishing of the apex predators, the overfishing of sharks. And people don't understand. I think anyone who grew up around the original Shark Week thinks that sharks are the scary thing that, you should kill them before they would kill you kind of thing.
No.
But we actually need the top predator to, with anything, if you have an imbalance, it's going to be an imbalance somewhere else. But you're going to talk about taking the very top predator out of an ecosystem. The repercussions of that are very close. I mean, the amount of sharks that are killed every year is stunning. It's staggering. So I'm gonna say overfishing just because this is a big something big in my life right now that I'm adding a module to my course about that because
Oh,
it
well done.
affects the whole ecosystem of the ocean.
Can you please
Nasty.
explain why apex predators are important?
Well, I mean, I guess if you think about, um, let's talk about human beings, right, as being like the apex predator on the earth. Actually, the removal of human beings might be a good thing. I don't know. But if you think about the impact of it's a food chain, right? So I talk about just on a reef level, right? So we had a big problem with grouper being overfished. And when there were less grouper, then there became more damselfish. And more damselfish, then, it ends up being this imbalance, and you can see the effects directly on the reef. So if you start going up and up and up the food chain and you remove the absolute top of that, the imbalance is going to affect the chain all the way down.
I remember the whole circle between let's say small corals, small fish, larger fish, and then apex predators. And because again, no, I don't want to sound like the soundtrack of the Lion King, but the circle of life in the marine in the marine environment, it is extremely well balanced by the fact that the poop basically generated by the marine that by the apex get put back into the circle that gets eaten by the little fish. The little fish, it is eaten by the medium one, that is eaten by the bigger one, that is eaten by the apex, and so on. This is my elementary oversimplification of the marine life balance, which it is very
Right.
scientific, but nonetheless, let me ask you something about the future. Okay, we talk about what's happened below water, what happens above water. Now let's talk for a second about the future. Okay, restoration is critical, but it needs to scale up, right? You keep hearing about immense barrier reefs like the one in Australia that gets bleached more and more every year.
Mm.
What's the long-term vision here in general and more granular for mother of coral? For example, are there new technologies that can help to do your job besides on education side, but also onto restoration projects? Or for example, funding strategies that can help take your job to the next level?
Mm. I think there are a couple things, right? So yeah, I mean, there's always new technology coming out in every field that could be leveraged. I mean, does it even reach as far as could you take this course remotely? and somehow be a part of the dive using some new technology to be able to, talk and film at the same time underwater, something like that. But I think for Mother of Corals, the future that I'm envisioning, I'm hoping for, is, really perfecting the process here where we are in Bocas del Toro, Panama, and um, making it sort of a cookie cutter process that you could take to any community anywhere in the world and have sort of satellite projects where um, that local community as well as tourists can be involved in the same type of project.
Well, Krista, thank you very much. This was a very interesting conversation. It is without any sort of doubt that corals are in desperate need of projects like yours, and the job that Mother of Corals is doing, that 300+% success rate, it is very, very promising. And if there are more projects like this, we can have a positive approach onto, let's say, the future of corals. Okay, so thank you very much for participating to Raw Green, and I look forward to the next catch up.
Great, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Raw Green. To get this far, you must have liked it. So don't forget to hit that like button and follow our podcast. It is a great way to support our community. At OBI, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and green tech innovation. Stay connected with us through our social media pages or visit our website. Links are below in the description. See you next time. Ciiiao.